People are starting to see what's coming to America, and I want to say something to you right at the top that I think you need to hear. You are not imagining it. Every single thing you have noticed is real, and most of it has a documented cause that almost nobody has ever explained to you. You applied for 40 jobs and nobody called you back? Roughly 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 online job postings in this country are what the Congressional Research Service itself calls ghost jobs, meaning positions that do not exist. You wondered why you cannot buy an $8,000 work truck. There is a 25% tariff, signed in 1964, over frozen chicken that is still on the books today. Your father had a pension and you never will. That was a specific legislative change with a date on it. The government announced they caught 455 people in a $6.5 billion fraud, and you never saw a dime. There is an actual answer for where that money goes. I am going to walk you through every one of these. Not opinions, documents. Because the feeling that something is wrong is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition, and you have been right the whole time. You applied for 40 jobs and nobody called back, and there is a congressional report on why. Let me start here because I hear this more than anything else, and because the people going through it are being made to feel like the problem is them. You have a degree, maybe 2. You have 20 years of experience. You apply to a posting, you get an email saying we would love to bring you in. We will call you tomorrow to set something up. And then nothing. You follow up. Nothing. You call, and somebody says, oh, actually we are not hiring for that anymore. And you sit there thinking, then why is the posting still up? Here is the answer, and I want you to understand that this is not a theory somebody came up with on the internet. The Congressional Research Service, which is the nonpartisan research arm that works for the United States Congress, has issued a report on this. They define the term, a ghost job is, in their words, an online job posting for a position that does not exist or that an employer is not planning to fill immediately. Congress has a definition for it. That is how normal this has become. Now let me give you the scale, because the estimates vary depending on how you measure, and I want to give you the honest range rather than the scariest number. An analysis of LinkedIn postings found roughly 27% of United States listings were likely ghost jobs. The hiring platform Greenhouse reported that 18 to 22% of the jobs on its own site fell into that category. Applicant tracking data from another platform put the floor around 18%. A survey of 1,000 employers found nearly 1 in 3 admitted posting jobs with no current intent to hire. Taken together, the honest range is somewhere around 20 to 35% depending on the industry. So somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 3 of the postings you are applying to are not real. And here is the number that I think is the most damning one, because it is not a survey where people self-report, it is an outcome measurement. Research published in the Columbia Law Review found that the ratio of actual hires to job postings has cut in half since 2019. It went from about 8 hires for every 10 postings down to 4 hires per 10 postings by 2024, half in 5 years. The same job board activity now produces half as many actual jobs. Now, why would a company do this? Because when you find out the reasons, some of them are ordinary and some of them will genuinely make you angry. The most common reason cited by HR professionals is pipeline building. They want a stack of pre-screened resumes ready for when a real opening appears. That is self-serving, but it is not malicious. Some post to signal growth to investors. A company that looks like it is hiring 50 people looks like a company that is expanding, and that matters when you are raising money. Some post because there is already an internal candidate lined up, and company policy or law requires the role be posted publicly. So the posting is real, the job is real, and the outcome was decided before you ever hit submit. And then there is the one that should make your blood boil. In one survey of hiring managers, 63% said they posted ghost jobs to signal to overworked employees that relief was coming, and 62% said they did it to make existing employees feel replaceable. Read that again. 6 in 10 admitted they post fake jobs so that the people already working there will feel more expendable and work harder. That is not a hiring practice. That is a psychological pressure tactic aimed at the people who already show up every day, and the applicants on the outside are just collateral. Now, here is why this matters beyond your own frustration, and this is the part almost nobody connects. Job postings are one of the inputs economists and the Federal Reserve look at to judge how healthy the labor market is. If a growing share of those postings do not correspond to real jobs, then the data everyone is steering by is overstating how much hiring is actually happening. A chief economist at one labor analytics firm put it exactly right. She said the rise of ghost jobs softens the signal of what a job posting really means. Another analyst at a major HR consulting firm said it is muddying the jobs report and making it harder for the Fed to understand what the labor market actually looks like. So when you hear a politician say there are plenty of jobs out there, understand that the number they are quoting may be counting listings that will never produce a hire. Here is what to actually do with this. Check the posting date, and if it has been up more than 30 days without changing, treat it with suspicion. If a company reposts the identical role every few weeks, that is a tell. If the salary range is absurdly wide, that is a tell. Because a real role has a real budget. Prioritize applications where you can identify an actual hiring manager and reach out directly, because a warm introduction bypasses the whole broken funnel. And here is the most important one: stop measuring your worth by your response rate. If a quarter to a third of the doors you are knocking on are painted onto a wall, the fact that they do not open tells you nothing about you. The reason you cannot buy an $8,000 truck is a 1964 tariff over frozen chicken. Now here is one of my favorite stories in all of American policy, because it is completely true, it is genuinely absurd, and it explains something that makes people furious without them ever knowing why. You have seen the videos. Toyota builds a small, simple, bulletproof work truck. It sells in other countries for somewhere between $8,000 and $13,000, brand new. It has an engine, a bed, a seat, and air conditioning. It does not have a 14-inch touchscreen or heated massaging seats or a $200 a month connectivity subscription. It just works. And people in America look at that and say, why can I not buy that here? The cheapest new pickup in the United States starts around $25,000. The answer is called the chicken tax. Here is what happened, and I promise I am not making this up. In the early 1960s, the United States had figured out how to mass-produce chicken on an industrial scale. In Europe, chicken was still expensive, closer to a delicacy. American producers started flooding the European market with cheap frozen chicken. And European farmers, particularly in France and West Germany, went to their governments and demanded protection. Those governments imposed heavy tariffs on American chicken, and American exports to Europe collapsed. The period from 1961 to 1964 is genuinely known in trade history as the Chicken War. There is a Senate floor account of a senator from Arkansas interrupting a debate about NATO nuclear weapons to complain about European hostility toward American chickens. So in 1964, President Lyndon Johnson retaliated. He imposed a 25% tariff on 4 categories of European imports: potato starch, dextrin, brandy, and light trucks. Now, why light trucks? Chicken has nothing to do with trucks. And here is the part that tells you everything. At the same moment, the United Auto Workers were worried about imported commercial vehicles, specifically Volkswagen vans and pickups coming into the American market. The union president went to the administration. Historians generally treat the truck portion of that tariff as a concession to organized labor and the domestic automakers, bundled into a chicken dispute because that was the vehicle available. So the tariff on trucks was never really about chicken at all. Chicken was the excuse. Now here is the punchline. The tariffs on potato starch, dextrin, and brandy were eventually lifted. The one on trucks is still in effect. Today, 62 years later, 25% on most imported light trucks, and the effects are exactly what you would expect. Domestic manufacturers control the overwhelming majority of the American pickup market. The Cato Institute studied it back in 2003 and called it, in the title of the paper, A Policy in Search of a Rationale. Foreign manufacturers spent decades finding clever ways around it, and the workarounds are genuinely funny. Japanese makers shipped trucks as cab chassis, meaning the entire truck minus the bed, which qualified for a 4% tariff instead of 25%, and then bolted the bed on after it landed in America. The government closed that loophole in 1980. Subaru added 2 extra seats to the back of a small truck so it would be classified as a passenger car rather than a light truck. Mercedes shipped vans to America partially disassembled and put them back together here. Every one of those maneuvers cost money, and every dollar of that cost ended up in the price you paid. Now I want to be fair, because I do not want you walking away with only half the story. There are legitimate arguments on the other side. The tariff pushed foreign manufacturers to build plants in the United States, which created American jobs that genuinely exist. Analysts at the Center for Automotive Research have argued that eliminating it now could have unintended consequences for American manufacturing. And a truck built for another market would not automatically be legal here anyway, because American safety and emission standards are genuinely different and genuinely strict, and some of those standards save lives. So the honest version is not that one tariff is single-handedly why trucks cost what they cost. Consumer preferences shifted toward bigger vehicles. Regulations added cost. Manufacturers found that larger trucks carry much higher profit margins and leaned into that. But here is what is undeniable and what almost nobody tells you. A specific policy, adopted in 1964, for a reason that has not existed in 6 decades, is still on the books, and its practical effect is to keep an entire category of cheap, simple, useful vehicles out of the reach of working Americans. Nobody voted on that this year, nobody debated it. It is just there, quietly in the tariff schedule, doing what it has done since Lyndon Johnson signed it. And that is the lesson I want you to take, because it applies to far more than trucks. When you find something in American life that makes no sense and seems designed to keep you paying more, very often the explanation is not a conspiracy. It is a rule somebody wrote a long time ago, for a reason that expired, that nobody has any incentive to repeal because the people it benefits are organized and the people it costs are not. And I want to sit on that distinction for a second, because I think it matters enormously for how you carry all of this. A conspiracy is secret. It requires coordination, silence, and people who would face consequences if it came out. Conspiracies are fragile because they depend on nobody talking. What I just described to you is the opposite. It is not secret at all. The chicken tax is in the published tariff schedule of the United States. Anyone can look it up in an afternoon. There have been think tank papers written about it, congressional testimony, and trade negotiations that used it as a bargaining chip. It has been sitting in plain sight for 62 years. It survives not because it is hidden, but because it is boring, and because the handful of parties who benefit from it care intensely, while the 300 million people who pay for it have never heard of it. That is a more uncomfortable explanation than a conspiracy. Honestly, a conspiracy at least implies somebody is minding the store. This implies nobody is, and that a rule can outlive its own reason by 6 decades because there is no mechanism anywhere that automatically asks whether it still makes sense. And here is one practical thing most people do not know. The tariff applies to new vehicles. There is a separate rule that allows vehicles over 25 years old to be imported without it, which is why you now see small Japanese K-trucks showing up on farms and rural properties across this country. People found the door that was left open. Your father-in-law has a pension, and you never will, and that was a decision somebody made. This next one is the one that I think hurts people the most, and it is the one where the older generation and the younger generation talk completely past each other. You have heard the story. A man works at a plant for 30 years, he retires, and now he has been retired longer than he worked there, and a check still shows up every single month, and it will keep showing up until the day he dies. He talks about it like it was normal, because for him it was normal. Everybody wanted to work at that plant. And if you called out sick, some of those employers actually paid you more that day because they assumed you had doctor bills and medicine to buy. And then he turns to his grandson and says, "Just work hard like I did." And the grandson wants to scream, because the thing his grandfather is describing does not exist anymore, and it did not disappear because young people got lazy. It was dismantled, deliberately, through specific changes, and you can date them. Here is the short version of what happened. For most of the mid-20th century, the standard retirement arrangement at a large American employer was a defined benefit pension. The word that matters there is defined. The benefit was defined. The company promised you a specific monthly amount for the rest of your life, calculated on your years of service and your salary. The company was responsible for funding it, for investing it, and for making sure the money was there. If the investments did poorly, that was the company's problem, not yours. In 1980, roughly a third of private sector American workers were covered by a plan like that. Today, depending on how you count, it is somewhere around 1 in 10, and among younger private sector workers, it is far lower than that. What replaced it was the defined contribution plan, the 401k. And notice the word that changed. It is no longer the benefit that is defined. It is the contribution. The company defines what goes in. Nobody defines what comes out. Where did it come from? A provision in the Revenue Act of 1978, Section 401, Paragraph K. It was not designed to replace pensions. It was originally understood as a supplemental savings vehicle, a tax-advantage way for employees to set aside extra money on top of a pension. A benefits consultant realized in 1980 that the language could be read to allow a full-blown employee savings plan with an employer match, and the first plans launched in the early 1980s. And corporate America looked at that and understood immediately what it meant. Under a pension, the company carried the risk. Market crashes, longevity, interest rates, all of it sat on the corporate balance sheet. Under a 401k, all of that risk transferred to the individual employee. If the market falls 40% the year you retire, that is your problem now. If you live to 96, That is your problem now. If you guessed wrong about which funds to pick, your problem. That transfer was the entire point, and it was framed to the American worker as freedom, portability, choice. You control your own retirement, and there is something to that, honestly. A pension only worked if you stayed at one company for 30 years, and it left people trapped in jobs they hated. Millions of workers whose companies went under lost pensions entirely. So this is not a story with a pure villain, but look at the outcome. Under the old system, a person of ordinary means, with no financial training, who simply showed up and did the job, ended up with guaranteed lifetime income. Under the new system, that same person is expected to be an amateur portfolio manager, to estimate their own life expectancy, to navigate fee structures, and to somehow not run out of money in a period they cannot predict the length of. We took a system that required nothing of the individual and replaced it with one that requires expertise most people were never given, and then we called the results a personal responsibility issue. So here is what I want you to actually do with this. If you are in that older generation, please stop telling younger people to just do what you did. They cannot. The instrument you used no longer exists. It is not encouragement, it lands as an accusation, and it is one of the deepest sources of resentment between generations right now. If you are the one without a pension, then understand your situation clearly rather than bitterly. You are your own pension fund, and that means a few things are non-negotiable. Capture the full employer match always, because that is the closest thing to free money that exists. Know exactly what fees you are paying inside your plan, because a 1% difference in expense ratio over 30 years is enormous. If you are 50 or older, turn on the catch-up contribution, because a startling number of eligible people never do. And here is the one almost nobody thinks about. If you want something that behaves like a pension, meaning guaranteed lifetime income you cannot outlive, the two main ways to build one are delaying Social Security to 70, which permanently increases your monthly check for life, and for some people, converting a portion of savings into an annuity. Annuities are a product where the details matter enormously, and where a lot of people get sold something bad. So if you go that route, talk to a fee-only fiduciary who does not earn a commission on the sale. But the underlying idea, converting a pile of money into a stream you cannot outlive, is exactly what your father-in-law's plant did for him automatically. He did not have to be smart about it. You do. That is the change, and it was made in a room, on purpose, and nobody asked you. They announced a $6 billion fraud bust, and you never saw a dime, so here is where it goes. I keep hearing a version of the same question, and it is a completely fair one. The government announces these enormous fraud takedowns, hundreds of people charged, billions of dollars. And people say, fine, great, you caught them, where is our money? Because we are the taxpayers who funded it, and there is no check in my mailbox. Let me give you the actual numbers first, because they are staggering and they are real. In June of 2026, the Justice Department announced its annual National Healthcare Fraud Takedown. Charges against 455 defendants, including about 90 doctors and other licensed medical professionals, involving over $6.5 billion in false claims, with cases spanning 56 federal districts and 45 states. The year before, the 2025 takedown charged 324 defendants, including 96 licensed medical professionals, across 50 federal districts and 12 state attorney general offices, involving over $14.6 billion in intended loss. That one more than doubled the previous annual record, which had been about $6 billion. So the scale is exactly as bad as people think. Healthcare fraud in this country runs into the billions annually, and a meaningful share of it is committed by licensed professionals who took an oath. Now here is the answer to where the money goes, and it has 3 parts, and I think understanding it will make you angrier in some ways and less angry in others. Part 1, and this is the crucial one that changes how you read every headline. That $14.6 billion number is described as intended loss. It is not $14.6 billion that was stolen and is sitting in a vault somewhere, waiting to be returned. It is the total value of the fraudulent claims that were submitted. Much of it was caught and never paid out. In the 2025 action, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced it had prevented over $4 billion from being paid on false claims and had suspended or revoked the billing privileges of 205 providers. So a large share of that headline number is money that never left the building. That is genuinely good news, and it never gets reported that way because prevented fraud does not make a dramatic story. Part 2. The money that actually was paid out and can be recovered gets seized, and it is a fraction. In the 2025 takedown, the government seized just over $245 million in cash, luxury vehicles, cryptocurrency, and other assets. Civil settlements added another $34.3 million, against $14.6 billion in claims. That is roughly 2%. Why so little? Because by the time investigators identify a scheme and build a case, the money is gone. It has been spent, moved offshore, converted into assets in other jurisdictions, or laundered through entities that no longer exist. One of the schemes in that takedown involved a transnational criminal organization that submitted over $10 billion in fraudulent claims, and the defendants were being tracked down in other countries. Part 3, and this is the direct answer to your question. Recovered funds do not go to individual taxpayers. They go back to the program that was defrauded, which is primarily the Medicare and Medicaid trust funds, and to the Treasury. There is no mechanism by which a fraud recovery becomes a check to you, and there never has been. Is that satisfying? No. But here is the reframe that I think is genuinely useful. Money returned to the Medicare trust fund is not nothing. That trust fund has a depletion date attached to it, and every dollar recovered marginally extends it. It is not a check in your mailbox, but it is not vapor either. Now let me give you the part of this that should actually concern you more than the recovery rate. Look at what these schemes target. Urinary catheters and durable medical equipment billed to patients who never received them. Wound care products, telemedicine, and genetic testing. Opioid diversion. Every one of those categories preys specifically on older Americans and disabled Americans, because those are the people with Medicare numbers and ongoing medical needs. Which means your Medicare number is a target. And there is a practical defense that costs you nothing. Read your Medicare summary notice or your explanation of benefits every single time it arrives. Do not throw it out. Look at what was billed in your name, and if you see equipment you never got, tests you never took, or a provider you have never heard of, report it. Because that is exactly how these schemes get caught, and the patient is frequently the only person in the chain who knows the service never happened. Never give your Medicare number to anyone who contacts you first. Not a caller, not a text, not somebody at a health fair offering a free knee brace or a free genetic test kit. That free brace gets billed to Medicare at an enormous markup in your name, and it can affect your ability to get an actual brace later when you genuinely need one. And if you suspect something, the Senior Medicare Patrol program exists in every state specifically to help beneficiaries identify and report this, and it is free. The government caught 455 people. Good. But the government did not catch them because a computer found them. In an enormous number of these cases, somebody noticed something on a statement and said, "I never got that." One jar says bioengineered, and the one next to it doesn't, and there is a rule behind that. Here is something people have been noticing at the grocery store and getting genuinely confused and upset about, and the explanation is boring, in a way that is actually reassuring, but the gaps in it are real and worth knowing. You buy a jar of something, you get it home, and you look at the back, and in small print near the ingredients it says derived from a bioengineered source, or there is a little green circle logo. And then you look at the jar you bought last month at a different store, same brand, and it does not say that at all. And you think, what are they hiding? Why does one say it and not the other? Here is what is actually going on. The United States has a mandatory federal labeling rule called the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard, administered by the USDA. Compliance became mandatory on January 1st, 2022. It requires food manufacturers to disclose when a food contains detectable genetic material that has been modified in a way that could not be achieved through conventional breeding or found in nature. That is the legal definition, and every word in it is doing work. The term used is bioengineered rather than GMO. That was a deliberate choice, and it frustrated a lot of consumer advocates because most Americans have spent 20 years learning the letters GMO and have no idea what bioengineered means. If you were trying to communicate clearly with the public, you would not pick a brand new term. If you were trying to satisfy a disclosure requirement without changing consumer behavior, you would pick exactly that term. Manufacturers can disclose in several ways: plain text on the package, that green symbol, a phone number to text, or a QR code you scan with your phone. And that last option is a genuine problem, because a disclosure that requires a smartphone and a data connection while standing in an aisle is not a disclosure for a lot of the people who most want the information. Now, why does one jar have it, and the identical-looking jar next to it does not? Several completely mundane reasons. Different production facility, different ingredient sourcing. A manufacturer running the same product in two plants may source oil or starch from different suppliers, one bioengineered and one not. Different country of origin. Notice that a lot of the labels people photograph say product of Canada or similar. Different supply chain, different inputs. And the big one, the standard is based on detectable modified genetic material in the final food. Highly refined ingredients like some oils and sugars can be processed to the point where no modified genetic material is detectable in the finished product, even though the crop they came from was bioengineered. Those may not require disclosure. So the label is not random, and it is not a conspiracy. It is a rule with definitions and thresholds, and the thresholds create exactly the kind of inconsistency people are noticing on the shelf. Now, here is where I want to be straight with you about the science, because I am not going to tell you what you want to hear if it is not accurate. The broad scientific consensus, including from the National Academies of Sciences, is that currently approved bioengineered foods are not more dangerous to eat than their conventional counterparts. That is a real finding from serious people, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But that is a narrower statement than most people realize, and here is what it does not address. It does not address the herbicide application patterns that some engineered crops enable. It does not address the concentration of the seed and agricultural chemical industry into a handful of enormous companies, which is a genuine economic issue for farmers. It does not address monoculture and the loss of crop genetic diversity, and it does not address the fact that Americans, unlike consumers in many other countries, spent decades unable to easily find out what was in their food at all. You can accept the safety finding and still be angry about the transparency, and I think that is the honest position. So here is what to do practically. If you want to avoid bioengineered ingredients, the disclosure label is the weakest tool available to you for all the reasons above. The stronger tools are the USDA Organic Seal, because Certified Organic prohibits bioengineered ingredients by rule, and the Non-GMO Project Verification, which is a private third-party certification with its own testing standards. Learn to read the actual ingredient panel rather than the front of the package. The front of a box is marketing, and the words natural and farm fresh mean essentially nothing legally. The panel is the regulated part, and here is the one I would emphasize most for anybody watching this. The ingredient panel tells you far more useful information than the bioengineering disclosure does. The number of ingredients, the presence of additives you cannot pronounce, the added sugar content, the sodium, those are the things with the strongest evidence behind them for your actual health. If you are going to spend energy reading labels, and you should, spend it there. Somebody on the internet told you to stop paying your credit cards, so let me tell you what happens. I need to spend some time on this one, and I am going to be blunter than usual because this piece of advice is circulating widely right now, and it is going to seriously hurt people who are already in trouble. The pitch goes like this. Money is not real. It is just numbers on a screen. Credit scores are a scam. I stopped paying my credit cards months ago, and my score actually went up, so stop paying them. Let me walk you through what actually happens, step by step, on a real timeline. Because the person making that video is either at the very beginning of a process they do not understand, or they are leaving out the ending. Day 1 through 29, after a missed payment, a late fee hits, and your interest rate may jump to a penalty APR, which on many cards runs around 29.99%. Nothing hits your credit report yet. Day 30, the delinquency is reported to the credit bureaus. Payment history is the single largest component of most credit scoring models, and a first 30-day late can drop a good score substantially, sometimes by 100 points or more. The higher your score was, the harder it falls. Day 60, 90, 120, 150, each additional 30-day mark reports separately and compounds the damage. The account is now in collections internally. Around day 180, the account is charged off. That word confuses people. Charged off does not mean forgiven. It is an accounting action where the lender writes the balance off its own books as a loss. You still owe every dollar. The charge-off is one of the most damaging single entries that can appear on a credit report, and it stays there for 7 years. After charge-off, the debt is typically sold to a collection agency for pennies on the dollar. That agency now owns it, and its entire business model is collecting from you. And then comes the part nobody in those videos mentions. A collector can sue you. If they get a judgment, depending on your state, that can mean wage garnishment, a bank account levy, or a lien on your property. Some states, including Texas, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and South Carolina, prohibit wage garnishment for ordinary consumer debt, and protections vary a great deal. But in most of the country it is available, and a judgment can be renewed for years. There is one more that genuinely blindsides people. If a lender or collector cancels or forgives $600 or more of debt, they can issue you a Form 1099-C, and the IRS generally treats forgiven debt as taxable income. So people who thought they had escaped a $15,000 balance receive a tax bill on $15,000 of phantom income the following spring. There are exclusions, particularly for insolvency, but you have to know to claim them. Now, about that claim that the score went up. There are lagging quirks in how scores update, and closed accounts and changing balances can produce odd short-term movement. But over any meaningful time frame, a pattern of missed payments and a charge-off does severe, lasting damage. Anyone showing you a score that rose is showing you a snapshot from very early in a process whose ending they have not reached yet. And here is why the damage matters even if you never want to borrow again. Your credit report affects your auto insurance premium in most states. It affects whether a landlord rents to you, which matters enormously if you ever need to move. It affects the deposit a utility company requires. Some employers check it for certain positions. It affects your ability to refinance out of a bad situation. It is not just about getting another credit card. Now, I want to be clear about something, because I am not lecturing anybody here. If you cannot pay, you cannot pay. Millions of American households are genuinely underwater, and no amount of budgeting fixes a gap between income and the cost of survival. That is real, and it is not a moral failing. My problem is not with people who are struggling. My problem is with people telling struggling viewers to walk away casually, as if there is no consequence, when the consequences land hardest on exactly the people who can least absorb them. So here is what to do instead, and every one of these is better than silence. Call the card issuer before you miss a payment, and ask specifically for their hardship program. Most major issuers have one. They can reduce your interest rate temporarily, waive fees, or set a fixed payment plan. They will not offer it. You have to ask for it by name, and you have far more leverage before the account is delinquent than after. Contact a nonprofit credit counseling agency, and the ones accredited through the National Foundation for Credit Counseling are the ones to look for. They can set up a debt management plan that consolidates payments and negotiates lower rates, and the counseling is typically free or very low cost. Be careful of for-profit debt settlement companies, which are a different thing entirely, charge substantial fees, and frequently tell you to stop paying, which is where a lot of this advice originates. Know your rights under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Collectors cannot call you before 8 in the morning or after 9 at night, cannot call you at work if you tell them not to, cannot threaten you with arrest, and must validate the debt in writing if you request it within 30 days. Requesting validation in writing is one of the most useful things you can do, because a substantial amount of purchased debt has incomplete documentation. And if the situation is genuinely unsalvageable, talk to a bankruptcy attorney. Most offer free consultations. Bankruptcy is a legal tool that exists in the Constitution's own framework for a reason, and a structured discharge with legal protections is a far better outcome than a slow-motion collapse with judgments attached to it. Do not take financial advice from someone who says the word scam more than they say a number. Nothing is fixable anymore, and this is the one area where people are actually winning. Let me end the list on something different, because I do not want you walking away thinking every single thing is going the wrong direction. There is one fight happening right now that ordinary people are actually winning, and almost nobody knows about it. You have noticed that nothing is fixable. The washing machine that dies at year 6, and the repair guy tells you the control board costs more than a new machine. The tractor that will not run until a dealer plugs in a laptop. The phone with the glued battery. The car we already talked about, where a headlight replacement requires removing the bumper. None of that is an accident of engineering. Much of it is design. The techniques have names. Parts pairing, where a component is serialized to a specific device, so a genuine replacement part will not function unless the manufacturer authorizes it. Software locks that prevent a repaired machine from running. Refusing to sell parts to independent shops or to owners. Refusing to publish service manuals or diagnostic codes. Adhesives instead of screws. The economics are obvious. If it cannot be repaired, it must be replaced, and the replacement is bought from the same company. Now here is the part that should encourage you. This has become one of the few genuinely bipartisan issues in American politics, and it is winning. Farmers led it. When a combine breaks down in the middle of harvest and the only person legally able to bring it back to life is a dealer technician who might be 2 days out, that is not an inconvenience, it is a crop. Farm organizations pushed hard, and the fight over agricultural equipment became one of the most visible fronts, and states began passing right-to-repair laws. Different states have taken different approaches. Some focused on consumer electronics, some on agricultural equipment, some on powered wheelchairs, which is one of the most infuriating categories because people have been left immobile for weeks waiting on an authorized technician for a chair they own outright. The laws generally require manufacturers to make parts, tools, and documentation available to owners and independent repair shops on fair terms. That is it, not free, available, and manufacturers have started to move, partly under legal pressure and partly to get ahead of it. Some have begun offering parts and manuals directly to consumers, which was unthinkable a few years ago. Now, is the fight won? No. Enforcement is uneven. Parts pairing remains a live problem, and every law has carve-outs that industry lobbied for. But the direction has genuinely reversed, and that is remarkable, because almost nothing in this video has genuinely reversed. I bring this up for a specific reason, and it is the point I actually want to leave you with. Every other item in this video is something that happened to ordinary people, because organized interests wanted it, and unorganized people did not object in time. The tariff stayed because the domestic manufacturers were organized. The pension disappeared because corporate benefits departments were organized and workers were not. Ghost jobs persist because there is no penalty for them and nobody is lobbying for one. Right to repair went the other way for exactly one reason. Farmers organized, repair shop owners organized, consumer groups organized. They showed up at state houses, testified at hearings that had 11 people in the room, and kept coming back for years. That is the whole difference. Not luck, not a change of heart from any company. People who showed up repeatedly in unglamorous rooms. So here is what to do with your own stuff. Before you replace an appliance, look up the model number and the symptom, because there is a very good chance somebody has posted a video of exactly that repair, and a shocking number of failures are a $30 part. Check whether iFixit or a similar site has a guide and a parts kit for your device. Find an independent repair shop in your area and use it before it closes, because they are closing. And check whether your state has passed a right to repair law, because if it has, you may be entitled to parts and documentation the manufacturer would rather not give you.